Hello and welcome to the Balanced Business Dad Podcast. This podcast is just one part of the Balanced Business Dad movement. This movement provides a platform of the important pillars of life while building this council of dads to support each other as we work to balance our lives. The 6 pillars of life that we strive to balance are our faith, our health, our marriage, fatherhood, brotherhood, and our business. We are here to build a council of dads to celebrate wins and as well as to share the challenges of being a husband and a father, and all the while working to keep our pillars in balance. The goal of the Balanced Business Dad movement is for dads to be better in all things, balanced, because everyone in our lives deserves it.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Balanced Business Dad. I'm your host, Dustin Hogue, and it would not be The Balanced Business Dad without my esteemed co-host, Mr. RJ Campbell. RJ, how are we doing today?
Doing great, gentlemen. I hope everybody's doing well out there. This is the only place, by the way, where I'm esteemed.
That is true. And I've asked around, so that is very true. Guys, I say this all the time that we're in for a treat, but this one's really going to hit home to me because our guest today, I don't know if my life would look the same, and he's not going to take the credit, but I'm going to give him the credit. I don't know if my life would be the same. Even my marriage would be the same if it wasn't for this gentleman that we're about to introduce. And he's showing a sign here, but Coach Hank Avink from Michigan was my very first coach that I invested money into when I couldn't afford it. But he's also was the first person that got me onto the path of personal growth and personal development, which honestly has spearheaded into so much. So, dads, welcome Mr. Coach Hank Avink from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Hank, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. You know that feeling of getting chills through your body where you hear something and literally it went almost to my toes, because at the end of the day, sometimes we don't realize the impact that we're having on others, especially when you're in the struggle yourself. And Dustin, when we did meet, I had the arrow pulled back pretty far. And I'm sure we'll get into that part of the story. But thank you for sharing that, because it truly is the fuel that makes me realize that this is bigger than me. And just because maybe we've won the game, we have to continue doing what we're doing because there's too much at stake not to.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said that better. So we're going to jump right into it and just let's, hear where Hank is today, and then kind of go back to a little craziness when I kind of met you and kind of a little bit out of balance you were back then. But what is Hank up to these days?
Yeah, up to these days, I took the better part of the last year off. My father-in-law has engaged hospice and needed that early spring. And if we back up even more, it was, I think, 13 years ago when my son was born, and we found out that he had a heart condition and he had to have open heart surgery. And it was at that moment, there was days where I had to make the decision whether or not to go to the hospital and spend the day with him or go to work, because I didn't have the luxury of making the choice of just going to see him, because financially we just weren't in a spot. And it was at that point that I made the decision at some point in my life, I would have enough income or enough money coming in that when I got punched in the jaw family wise, I didn't have to worry about the money. So when my father-in-law decided to engage hospice, we were in a spot where, in July of this year, when I worked probably 5 hours that whole month, we still had over $70,000 come in. And it was because of a decision that was made years ago on giving up the safety net and going for it.
Right. Wow. So that's crazy. Well, prayers with you guys for your father-in-law and, peace there. So obviously married, so wife and 2 kids, correct?
Nope. We have 3 kids. We have 2 boys, a girl, and then we have 2 exchange students. We've hosted exchange students over the years. And then one of our exchange students, her sister, who's 28, just came over. So we're helping her get a job. They're from a little country called Azerbaijan. And, it gives great perspective. I think oftentimes we as dads need some perspective because we can get into the woe is me because life probably isn't turning out how we all thought it was going to be. And, so with 5 kids, there's never a dull moment in my house.
Yeah, and I apologize. I thought for some reason it was only 2. I knew Charlie, and I thought there was one other, so I apologize. So
you're good.
That's a lot of action going on, and working 5 hours in the month of July and still being financially, set or financially stable, if you will. how'd you get there? Like what steps to make sure that you got that happen?
Yeah, here's what we did was we understood the math. So for those of you that might be listening, on my forearm, I have a tattoo that says math versus drama. And I recently heard through a book, and I don't know that I was thinking this consciously, but I would fast forward with maybe who my boss was. And the way they put it in this book was, do you like the house they have? Do you like the marriage they have? Do you like the relationship with their kids that they have? And at the end of the day, when I started looking around, I didn't see examples of what I wanted in life. And when I saw that, I would go seek them out and I would get into action, which is phase one. Then what would happen is you get to look behind the doors and I'd keep asking myself, is this what I want out of life? Is there something more? So once I did the 80%, I'm trying to get a lot in here. So let me take a deep breath.
Yep.
Here's what I did. I decided what I wanted out of life and I decided what I didn't want out of life. And then I decided the next pillar post to get there. That was the next logical step. And then once I got at that pillar post, once I got to the top of the mountain, I got to see what was on the other side. And then I made the next best decision. Now, during that, sometimes you have to go backwards in order to go forward. So on my other forearm, I have an arrow. The reason I have the arrow is, Dustin, when you met, my wife and I strategically decided to give up 3 years of my life. And when I say give up 3 years of my life, I did 600 flights in 3 years with 3 little ones at home, 2 little ones, and then another one that came. And if you can imagine 600 flights in 3 years, I worked probably 16 to 20-hour days most days. Yet we knew if we could give up these 3 years, the amount of foundation that we've had, so do today, live today so you can live tomorrow like no one else, those 3 years were critical for the opportunities that we have now. And although it was tough, we decided sacrificing early on would be much better for our kids in the long run.
Yeah. So let's just kind of jump in. I met you in 2015. And you were a national speaker and a coach, and you were traveling all over the world, 600 flights in 3 years. And I think maybe that was the third year. Wasn't 2015 the last year we're doing that?
Yeah, that's when I was hanging on by a thin rope. And in the spring of 2015, I got a phone call from my wife, and she goes, "Hey, we just got Henry deodorant." And it was like the life was just sucked out of me. And she goes, "Are you there?" I said, "Yeah." I go, "I think I'm done." She goes, "What do you mean you think you're done?" I go, "I can't do this anymore. That should have been me." And whether you think that's chauvinistic or not, but that's something I wanted to do with my son, was go and get deodorant and have those conversations. And she goes, "What do you mean? We're just starting to make the money that, we were dreaming of. We just built our home. I'm staying at home. What does this look like?" And here's the thing was, I didn't know how we were going to do it. I just knew the why behind it. And I made the decision at that point that something had to change. And it was a 9-month process, and it was scary. And there's a lot to that journey, and it was messy. That's what arrows are. When you draw them back, they're used for killing, whether it's for killing food or whether it's for war. When you draw the arrow back and it shoots forward, what people don't realize is when it shoots forward, it can be messy. And a lot of people can't handle what it takes to do that, because it is messy.
Yeah. I remember I didn't know it was spring of 15 when you made that decision, but I met you in October of 2015, 1 month after I actually got married. And
okay.
Yes, because we got married in September. And I remember just seeing, first of all, the most energetic person I've ever seen in my life, by the way, teach a class for 8 weeks. But I also saw a man that was out of balance. And I didn't know what I was noticing then, but I knew I was noticing something, because there were several times in that class where you would break down almost when you would talk about certain things. And not to bring up the past, but bring up a past, because what I think is really cool about your story and why we wanted you on here is you were so out of balance in the pillars that we focus on. And yet you chose to do that to make your life better in the future. So if you remember October 15, I'm assuming you do, what was going through your head during that time? Like, we just have to make it through this, or what was going on?
Well, here's what it was, is a lot of us are spoiled little brats, and we want to do what's tension relieving right away. And we knew doing it any sooner than January 1st would put our family in harm's way. And here's what I realized was I had to lie to people, because unfortunately I was in a position where I couldn't be truthful, and I couldn't let people know what was going on, because the second I did, I knew that I'd be without a job and I'd be in harm's way. So imagine for 9 months knowing that you're going to go do something and having to live this lie as if everything's great. So in that room, it was finally, we were at the finish line. I hit my goal. We were going to have $100,000 a month in December. That was going to be the cash flow to carry us over. And it was at that time where I stopped having the thumb on me. Meaning in that class, I knew that the chains were finally about to be broken off and I could let that raw emotion go. And I loved doing the job that I did. And here, some of the men that are watching this might be able to understand, I'm naturally a business person. Like, that's where I thrive. I'm not naturally being a dad. I've had to go to play therapy to figure out how to play with my little girl because I'm not in tune to that. If I'm not intentional, I'll work 20-hour days because that's where I thrive. And I had to put up boundaries so that I don't just default to that. I recently gave up drinking about 6 months ago because I realized I was numbing myself and getting ready to go through the grief stage. I didn't want to numb myself through that. So yeah, it was a challenge. And through that, I realized some core principles of my life. No one will ever have their thumb on me again. There are several times during those 3 years that, someone had the ability to make a decision and fire me, and my family was going to be in harm's way. And fire me for things that were just ridiculous. And I was led by fear. I was led by, it was just, with all that said, there's so much that came great from it. And I'll be forever grateful for that bold because there's a good friend of mine, and I won't throw him under the bus. I was staying with him, and he helped a lot with me making the decisions to do what I was going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That was amazing. And again, kudos to you because, man, you went through hell to get where you are today. And I remember seeing it. But in that class, I remember, man, I knew because I was really in business for myself for probably about a year then because I got into real estate full-time December of 14. So that was my first full year as an entrepreneur, right? And there's a couple things that you said, and I'm just going to bring up some of the lessons that I learned from you in that class and going forward.
Okay. I might need to take notes because I probably need to learn those lessons again.
One of them I thought was really cool, and I don't know exactly how it went, but it was to be present where you are, what you're doing at that time. And what you had talked about is when you taught, because you taught for 8 hours, right? And you were out of town in different states, different cities, that kind of thing, but you turned your phone off and you would not check it the rest of that day. And you did that because you wanted to be present with what you were doing. And you realized that there was nothing you could do, even if there was an emergency at the time. And I remember that really hit me. You're like, if my wife calls me and says, our house is on fire, or one of the kids is sick, which we'll get into that story if you don't mind, how you kind of grew up, went through some of that. You knew that you couldn't do anything at that time anyway. So you made sure you were so present in every moment that mattered. Or at least that's what I got out of it. I don't know if that's what you were trying to portray, yet that's what I got out of it.
Well, here's what happened. In today's day and age, everybody has access to you. And for the first time in my life in that room, I had sometimes up to 200 people that I was focused on. And the reality is if you have a problem, don't create more problems, because that's number one. I remember my wife, we had an agreement. She would never give me bad news before I was going into the room because there was people's lives. I mean, Dustin, I say that I'm just the match. You were a dry hay, and what a luxury I had of pouring into someone like you. She called me and she said, hey, I'm not sure if I should tell you this, but I need to because I need to hear your voice and assurance. And my wife had found a lump, and her sister's a doctor, and there was enough evidence that it wasn't going to be good. And I was in New Orleans, and I said, okay, I will see what it looks like for me to get home. And so we looked at chartering a plane, and it was like $28,000. We looked at changing my flights, and I would have got home 2 or 3 hours sooner. And the reality was there was nothing that I could do because if she had cancer, this was a marathon, not a sprint. So here's what we did. I said, honey, all I can do is if I don't show up and teach this class, I'm going to create more problems because now there's 100 plus people that need to retake the class. I'm not going to get home any sooner. We're going to have fees and changing the plane. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take care of what I need to take care of so that when I'm done here, we can take care of you. So what I did was I asked the person to leave the car, and I bawled my eyes out because sometimes when you have that ball of emotion, you need to get that emotion out. And I bawled my eyes out. And then I said, you know what? Let's go. I gave everybody a heads up in that room that there was a family challenge going on, yet I was going to show up so that when I left there, I could take care of business. I had one of the best days that I ever had. And here's why. If I didn't show up and do what I needed to do, I was going to cause more problems for my family. Then this is what we talked about earlier. Some of us need to grow up and be a man, meaning there's times where there's nothing you can do except not create more problems and do what you need to do and pretend that your life isn't what it is and just focus on that little gap that you can control and then move on to the next one. By the way, she was fine.
Yeah.
So one of the old bold laws was you get what you deserve in your imagination. We didn't know for a fact that we had a problem yet. So why allow our mind to go down that little thing? I just prayed and knew everything was going to be okay. And if it wasn't, guess what? Just like my bankruptcy, some of my lowest points in my life, or my son going through open heart surgeries, are blessings that help me be who I am today. And having not gone through those things, I wouldn't be who I am today or in the position that I am. Because if you go bankrupt and then you have a son go through open heart surgery, what are you going to do to me? Like, you can't hurt me. Oh, Dustin, you're mad at me because I was a minute late. Ooh, sorry, buddy. I wasn't late, by the way.
No, you were not today. That puts it all in perspective, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, I remember I used to have these conversations when, because I have 3 grown kids, and when they were first driving, and I'm the worrier in the family, and my wife is the calm one. And so I would be awake, at midnight, laying in bed, thinking, oh my gosh. She's like, what is wrong? I said, I can't sleep. I'm waiting for, Richie or Blake or Madison to get home. They're out. It's like, what if they have an accident? What if they're in a ditch? And my wife would always be like, you're not going to be able to do anything from here. So get some rest and deal with it when you get a phone call and have to get a tow truck. It's like, why sitting up? That's not doing you any good. And you're imagining all these problems. You're just making it worse. And it's not something you can affect. So you're right, causing more problems by worrying about things that we can't fix at that moment in time anyway.
So true.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. So again, that was a big lesson there. One of the other lessons that I hold true that I work on every day today, and I don't know if you're still doing this, but you put it as my number one coaching session of the day is what? You remember that?
Coaching session with myself? Was that it?
It was taking your kids to school.
Oh, yeah. I took my daughter today.
Yeah. And that is something that probably gets my morning, because I have that same mindset now when I take my kids to school, that allows me to enjoy that moment more than the chaos and everything that's going on in the morning. You got to get these kids out of everything like that. But that is my mindset now, and it's because of you. That is such an opportunity, because obviously when you were traveling so much, you didn't have that opportunity. So having that opportunity was such a big lesson from you. And Dustin,
I think that's what really helped me was one of my mentors once changed my language from have to get to. Like, we get to bring our kids to school. And one of my daughter was talking about wanting to skip a grade and the school decisions and where we take her to private school is a 30-minute drive. And I said, Tessa, selfishly, I'd like to have you around for another year. And she was talking about whether or not she wanted to go to the public school, which is 5 minutes away. And I said, one of the highlights of my day is spending the 30 minutes with you on the way. I mean, if you look at the math behind that, 30 minutes a day times 180 days or whatever they have in school, I mean, there's a compounding effect of that time on task that you just can't put a price tag on.
Right. And it's such an opportunity, and that's how I look at it. Even if my day's crazy, and like today, RJ and I are actually traveling out of town right after this call, so I don't get to see them anymore tonight. Yet I had that opportunity with him this morning, and I think that's where we have to be intentional how we live our lives. And I get that some of us are busier than others, why we're pushing through some of the suck, if you will. Yet to make sure you put that intentional time with your children in there was so huge, and it changed my mindset all with the mornings. That even it's hectic to get out, but when I'm in the car, when I'm driving, it's such a blessing, and I appreciate that. The next one was uncomfortable accountability, daily uncomfortable accountability that you put in your life. And that was a story of what I think it was Charlie, what you taught him to say when he was 2 or 3 years old.
Yeah. So I left a position that wasn't paying enough money in order to go on the road and make no money. So we were definitely doing within while doing without. And the reality was, when I met my wife, I was going through my bankruptcy. I was living on a lake, and I had the picture of success, but it was all falling apart. And And I made a commitment to myself that I would take care of my wife and take care of my family. And if I didn't do that, I would have another man step in and do it. So the reality was for me to take care of my family, all I needed was 2 appointments a day. That's what the math boiled down to, is if I did 2 appointments a day, 5 days a week, 10 appointments a week, 10 times 50, 500 appointments, there's no way that we wouldn't reach our goals. Well, this was back when we had the BlackBerry. So when I walked in the door after a day, all my kids wanted was my time. And so they would come and I taught them a script, and they were so super cute. There was Charlie and Henry at the time. And they were to stand back and go, "Daddy, daddy, daddy," after they gave me a hug. And you know that hug where they run to the door and they're right at that level where they're going to hit you in the groin. So if you don't brace yourself, and they come and give me the hug, and no matter how bad my day was, like, that would just wash away. And then they'd step back and say, "Daddy, did you get your 2 appointments today?" And if I got my 2 appointments, I could hand them my BlackBerry. And at 4 years old, they were able to turn the BlackBerry off. And we had 60 minutes at that time, like 60 minutes. That was the high bar. And they could turn it off. And if I didn't get my 2 appointments, this was the script. "Daddy, what came up today that was more important than Mommy, Charlie, and I?" I mean, how do you answer that? Yeah. And then what I did was I fast forward, Dustin, of how many times I would have to have that conversation before I had to have the conversation that it was moving time, because we were living in a 1,200 square foot condo. And we had gone backwards. So we were living in a 2,000 square foot, cookie cutter home to a condo so that we could build our own home. It was supposed to be a 2-year pivot. We were there for 5 years. And I pictured what it'd be like by not getting those 2 appointments too many days and not being able to stay in the condo because we weren't making the money to even stay there. And what it was going to be like to tell my kids that we were moving, but I wasn't moving with them because Mommy was going to move in with her parents. And the reason that Mommy was going to move in with her parents was because Daddy and Mommy haven't been getting along, because I knew I would self-sabotage and be an asshole if I wasn't, sorry, I'm not sure if we're supposed to swear.
That's okay.
Taking care of our family. And I knew that if I couldn't be the man that she deserved, I would self-sabotage so that she could go find the man. And I imagined having that conversation with my kids that I was no longer going to be there every single night or every single day, and there was going to be another man. And then I pictured what it was like having the most despicable man speaking into my kids' lives as the new stepdad, and what that was going to be like to co-parent and all of that stuff. And nothing against all y'all that have gone through divorces. This is about me and it's not about you. Right. And I ingrained that in so much. So we've gone through years of marriage therapy. Like, I felt what it was going to feel like to have the absolute bottom of my life happen. I said, there's no way I'm going there when all I got to do is 2 appointments a day. And I just made the pain of not doing something greater than the pain of doing it. And so when things came up, like the copier wasn't working, sorry, I don't have my 2 appointments figured out. I'm going to leave the brokerage because the copy isn't working. Hey, there's the door.
Yeah.
Wow.
Needless to say, we're no longer living in the condo. And we're doing okay after 2 appointments a day for time on task over time.
I still remember hearing that the first time, and I don't know if I've ever personally put myself in, because honestly, that was a pretty dark path to make you think about that horrible thing to make you take action. But that is a hell.
So Dustin, here's what I think everybody needs to do is you need to get some perspective, because we've gotten soft over the years.
Yeah.
And whenever I need perspective, like, woe is me. I mean, my son was born, had to have open heart surgery. He's allergic to beef, dairy, egg, beef, or pork, and gelatin. So basically everything.
Right.
Yet when I think about living through the Holocaust and having your kids taken away from you, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, when I think about like other times, like, good God, suck it up. Like, what you're dealing with is nothing in comparison. I think about what it's like to hold your child's hand dying with cancer. So a lot of us need to get perspective that whatever we're dealing with isn't nearly compared to what others have dealt with. And the fact that my son's, mad at me, there's been times where I thought, hey, what would my friend Charles have to give this conversation with Addie died when she was 4 of cancer.
Yeah. And
now my son, who is the same age, is now 7. Charles would give everything to be able to have this problem with his kid right now. So, Dustin, I walk myself through hell when it comes to mindset, because it helps with perspective. And some of us need to get some perspective.
Wow. So, Hank, it almost sounds like when you're describing that, for your 2 calls a day, it sounds like you dug so deep into that you actually were there. I was just thinking about what it could be with your wife living with another man who's not the person you want raising your kids. That you were so deep into that it was reality.
Yeah, there's times in the room where I would cry telling it because I would get right there on what it was like, where I could feel the real authentic. I could see in Henry's eyes that just that concern, him being scared, him not wanting that to happen, not understanding. Like, I made it so real that I never have to worry about that, because when it's about following my schedule, here's the thing. Since 2016, you can give me any date of a work week. I can tell you exactly what I did every hour on the hour. Here's why. I think I'm responsible to my family. When I go to work, I get paid. And only 10% of my time was volunteer time, where I didn't hold it accountable for an outcome. Because now that we have freedom, I look at opportunities like this are more towards impact. And if I can help impact more people, because I don't have to worry about money anymore, it's all a math equation. So, yeah, and I have ADD, if you couldn't tell.
Well, God, there's so many things. So, you left that job, very high paying job, and I remember this really well. And I was blessed enough. Well, there's two things that you blessed me with, but I was blessed enough that you were starting to coach individuals, and I could take that up on. I believe I was one of your first 14.
I think you were, and I just seeing where you are now, going back to where you were, it's like unrecognizable, dude. You're a freaking stud. Like, if you guys don't realize how much Dustin's been through to get to where he is, I mean, it's one of the most proudest moments that I had, that I just had a little part of that. Great job, man.
I appreciate that, and like I said, it was.
And you were kind of chicken shit back then too. You aren't anymore.
Well, yeah, definitely not anymore. But it's. You had so much faith in yourself. A lot of times when we talk about faith, we talk about spiritual faith and things like that. But one of the things I want to hit on here is you had so much faith in yourself that you were going to still win when everybody was taking shots at you after you left that job.
It was brutal.
It was very, and it snows a lot more than it does in Michigan than it does here. But I remember there was a video that you had posted on Facebook. You were doing lives a lot on Facebook. And you were in tears on that live video while it was snowing. I don't know if you remember this.
Was
it
the one when I was shirtless?
You weren't shirtless. No, this was an emotional video for you, because you just realized that it's all going to be okay by watching the snowfall, and you felt like an inner peace. And obviously it was, because look at what you've done in those short amount of time. So it's so amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was scary. We've built multiple businesses over $1 million in revenues since then, since 2016. And it was scary, because I was a big fish in a small pond, and I had high significance. And I went to a non-year one compete where it was ugly. I mean, there was times where I thought that I was going to lose it all. There's a video that I was speaking of where I got a cease and desist that I wasn't supposed to be on social media, and they were going to come after me. And so I figured, what can I do to tell them they can't screw you? I went in middle of a snowstorm with my shirt off and my skivvies to be as loud as I could, that if you try to silence me, I'm just going to get louder. And people thought I was crazy, because I think my eyes were rolling around. And now you fast forward, now people have done similar journeys, and they realize that, I was being bullied, and I was being bullied pretty hardcore. And people weren't there for me, and it was a tough time. And you know what? Rough seas make skilled sailors, and we're going into some rougher seas with everything going on in the economy. And I'm just rolling up my sleeves and getting back to work.
I love it. With all of this that's went on in your life, with, health scares with your children, to this completely out of balance life because you're on the road so much, to a pretty blessed life right now that you work your ass off for. To close it out, what's the one thing that you would talk to about the dads, to how to strive for that balance that we strive for in all these pillars? What's the one thing you would leave them with?
I'm going to do this. There's a song called "Man in the Mirror," and regardless of what you think about Michael Jackson, I think so many of us, it's confusing. It's confusing what our roles are today as a dad and a husband, because it looks a lot different than everything, leading up to the last 100 years and definitely the last 50 years. I think you need to look in the mirror, and it all starts with you. And I think I remember thinking my marriage might be coming to an end, and then I realized
it's not that my wife had changed. I had changed how I was showing up for my wife, and how I was showing up for my wife, I wouldn't wish for my daughter. And Susan Scott once said this: your daughter's not going to marry you. She's going to marry the relationship that you have with your wife. And so the men out there that are obviously listening to this, believe in yourself. Believe that you can make a change, and it's not going to be easy. And pour into yourself. I've read several hundred books. I've been to therapy over and over and over again. And don't give up. It's worth it, because I can tell you on the other side, it's unfreaking believable when you make it through those dips. So I'm not sure if that was the answer you were looking for, but Dustin, you said I believed in myself, and that wasn't always true. I had a few people around me. One was a coach of mine, and he said, Hank, but anytime you don't believe in yourself, borrow my opinion of you, because I believe in you, and you know that I wouldn't say that if I didn't. And sometimes you have to fake it before you make it, and not like a fraud standpoint, but it's doing within while doing without. And you have to have faith versus fear. And, just keep going, one foot in front of the other.
Wow. Honestly, that gave me a chills. The borrow my opinion of you. That's kind of RJ and I's mission in a way here. Our goal with the Balanced Business Dad is for dads to wake up and be better than they were today than they were yesterday. That's it. Just be better and keep moving. Yep. And we formed the Balanced Business Dad Council for that same thing, that we can be the other people's support when they're not having, that faith in themselves, and to make sure that they're focusing on those right pillars. So that honestly gave me chills. I can also say, guys, I was blessed enough that I've seen Hank dance on a chair to Man in the Mirror. So great times.
Well, I appreciate you guys doing this podcast. I had done something similar with another couple groups of guys, and what we realized, it wasn't the right chemistry and the right timing. I think there's a huge need for this. I think some of the examples that we have out there are too far over to being a man. What I sense from you guys is you have a nice balance of being a man, but not like a Neanderthal. Actually being the man of this century and doing it in a great, respectful way. So thank you.
Thank you. And we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Where can people find you? Anything we can do for you?
Be kind. If you're in a spot and you're in a tough spot, go help somebody, because I don't care how low you are, you can always help somebody, and that will help change you. And you can find me mostly on Facebook. Frankly, I've done a lot of subtraction. I have another tattoo right here where subtraction leads to multiplication. It's tough to get proximity to me these days, because I do believe in relationships, but if you connect with me on Facebook, that's probably the best way. Yet I don't really have anything to sell right now. It's harder and harder to get proximity to me, because I believe that subtraction leads to multiplication. But we have some things in the works where we can serve more people. There might be a book in the works. There might be a few other things. So,
love it. Awesome. Well, we will, keep that. Love it. And all right. Thank you so much, Hank.